Hello again.
It's Matt and Kim.
So, more talk about marriage, but this time we are going to talk about law of attraction and how it relates to marriage and how it plays out in our marriage and in a lot of other friends' marriage. We're outing you all.
And I'm going to translate a little bit, like law of attraction. Some of you have read the book The Secret. Guys, there's a movie, so it's a little bit easier than having to read a book. But a lot of what Kim's going to touch on is also touched on in that book or in that philosophy.
Right. So, law of attraction is basically that your base thoughts, beliefs, and vibrations is what attracts every single situation that you manifest in your life.
Okay, translation. The way that you feel affects things around you, and if you don't believe that, just play along and see what happens. That's how I did at the beginning. I was like, I don't believe it, but why not play around?
Sure. So it's fun to play with it, but the way it plays out in relationships is that essentially whatever we're creating in our relationship, or whatever we think about the other person, or whatever base vibration or negativity that we're in, is essentially what we create and manifest within the relationship. So if I'm bitchy and I think my husband doesn't do anything around the frickin' house and what the fuck, then pretty much I will filter and attract him pretty much doing nothing around the house.
And if I think no matter what I do, she's not going to have sex with me, she will not have sex with you. Hypothetically.
Right.
Hypothetically.
Because you're resisting the possibility for the universe to bring that to you. And we've seen it play out everywhere in our relationship. And before we actually really understood law of attraction to the depth that I think we understand it now, what we found is as long as we were feeling negative toward each other, we were going to have negative experiences. As long as our thoughts were like, he's not enough, he's not doing enough, he's not whatever enough.
And then it's a death spiral, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I have this negative thought and I throw some like crap out there to you that pisses you off more. You throw it back to me and like the fight just turns into a death spiral and we're sleeping in different bedrooms and not talking for a week.
Right. So what we think and what we've practiced is this ability to really kind of step back and take responsibility separately so that we can dissolve all the stuff that's going on.
Tell them the term you use.
We call it dumping the purse.
I knew nothing about this at all.
Well, we were doing it for many years before we even termed it.
I never knew people dumped purses.
Literally. Right. So what I mean by that, guys, is like when you're done with a purse or you want to change purses, you dump all of the contents out, and then there's a ton of shit that built up in the purse, and you're like, where did that come from? Why is that even in here? And so you leave all the stuff that you don't want in the purse there on the table, and you only put back into the purse that which you want. And so that's kind of what the process that we've been going through without really knowing it.
It's a really freaking scary process.
It is a scary process.
Like literally, you're throwing your relationship on the table saying, which of these pieces do I want to take to the next step of my relationship, and what pieces am I keeping on the table?
Right, and it's super vulnerable, but if you're not really happy with how the relationship is going, you might as well take the risk and throw it all on the table. So it's a lot about setting the ego aside, and so you probably may know by now that I'm a yoga teacher, and I teach about spirituality and meditation.
And I'm not.
And he's been brainwashed, really, no. So one of the core tenets of really owning the whole law of attraction within a relationship is taking responsibility for our own vibrations and for what's going on with ourselves. And so when Matt and I get into a fight, usually one of us has got a bug up our ass and is pissed about something, and then we kind of just vomit it on each other, and then it goes back and forth. And so the first thing we do is make sure...
Well, hold on. Maybe we should talk about how we used to do it. So like at the beginning, It would be like, I'm blaming you because you did this thing, and therefore you made me feel really bad about this, and so therefore I'm going to make you feel really bad because I feel bad, and then that will solve all of our problems.
And it's all your fault.
Right, fault's a big one. Blame and fault. If I can figure out a way to make you responsible for how I'm feeling right now, then I might feel better.
Right. I don't feel good, and it's your fucking fault. So fix yourself and get back to me.
Right, yeah. If you fix this, I will feel better.
Right. Sound familiar? Or some people use avoidance. Maybe they don't use anger and they use avoidance and they just think it's your problem, you're the one that's wrong, and I'm going to avoid you. And
Right.
so there's different processes that we all take. But essentially, something doesn't feel good in me. I see you as the reason. And there is probably some data to support the fact that you're not really kind of living
Well,
up to what I
we're in a
think.
relationship. There's a role that I did play,
Right.
but I'm not the fault.
So our first rule of thumb is that the person who originally had the issue and had the bug up their ass needs to go and kind of chill out and figure out what's going on for them, because they have attracted essentially this situation or this negativity.
It's like a timeout when you were like 5. Now it's like you're 40 and you're still doing a timeout. Like you got shit to go deal with. Go deal with it, then come back and we'll discuss it.
And as soon as you can take the blame off the other person and really kind of go inward with it and say, oh, how am I responsible for this negative shit that I got going on in me? And it doesn't feel good to sit with it. But once you sit with it, then there's the recognition of like, okay, I've attracted this in some way into our relationship. How do I release it now? How do I take responsibility and release it? Now, often that will lead in us to the place of the dumping of the purse, because I've got all my shit, and then he goes, looks at his shit, because usually both of the people are upset or angry, and it's through that process that we really look at, okay, do I want to be in this marriage? Do I love this person? And sometimes it may not feel like I like the person, but if that can be kind of separated from, yes, I love this person, I got into this relationship and this marriage because I wanted to be here. So that's first and foremost, and I think that's a theme of keeping that unified vision of I want to preserve the relationship until it's like undeniable that the relationship can't be preserved.
Yeah, I think that's a key piece, is knowing like the base state here is we want to grow together. We want to figure out a way to we remember back to that day when we first fell in love, or when we got married, or those.
Even though we were dependent on each other, it was probably for the wrong reasons.
Right, but we had a desire to be with this person. That desire stays no matter how pissed you get about this thing that happens in this exact moment.
Right. And I think we live in a disposable society where if situations or people or relationships don't work with us, we're like, well, I don't need that, or they don't need me, or we put a big spiritual bow around like how it's justifiable to just kind of release the relationship. But I think in marriages that have kids, it's worth just kind of pushing through and getting super vulnerable and dumping out the purse and saying, here's what I've got going on. And typically, and we'll get into this at another point, it's got to do with all of the shit that started at 5 years old because your mother would never respond to you when you called and asked for it, or your sister always made you feel like you weren't good enough. You know, it like basically runs down to a tiny mad idea that you had when you were 5 years old. And we're just triggering and replaying that stuff for each other all the time.
And your spouse is like the easiest target, right? They're the ones you're living with, they're the ones you're raising kids with, they're the ones you're eating dinner with. So it's like the easiest person to have that bounce off.
Right. We're each other's mirror, essentially. So we see the ugliest stuff within ourselves in our spouse.
So the cool part is why not use this relationship as the place to fix that? Like, you know, if you can come to that the other end of that recognition and say, I now have a playground, a safe playground to be able to work on that stuff for me, all the better to do it in this relationship rather than bolting and trying to go screw it up somewhere else.
Right. And even if you don't know if that's the relationship for long term, forever and ever, amen, what we're building in ourselves by working through these relationship issues is fortifying who we are as human beings. It is growing us and it is transforming us, because it takes balls to look at yourself at this level of detail. It takes total courage and responsibility to kind of open yourself up and say, who am I and what kind of crap am I pulling with this partner of mine?
Yeah.
So a little exercise to do is to, next time you get into a confrontation or an argument, or if you avoid the confrontation or an argument, just take a look inward and kind of feel into whatever vibrations are going on and take responsibility of how you created and manifested and attracted the situation and the negativity. You don't have to take like all the responsibility, but you also don't need to pin it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's easier to do it on someone that's not your spouse. Like if you think about it, like the person who cut you off, like they really had nothing to do with it, or maybe a small child. So, you know, you don't have to do it with your spouse, because sometimes you can still make up the story for your spouse.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see you next video.
Bye.